Staff Sergeant Ingram picked up the deployment file she'd set on the briefing table and dropped it in the mud outside the motor pool. Deliberately. Then he turned to the three men behind him and said, loud enough that two mechanics 20 feet away stopped what they were doing and looked up. Headquarters sent us a new range safety officer. He looked her over once, the way a man examines a piece of equipment he didn't order and has no intention of using, wearing body armor. Sergeant Rains said nothing. She crouched, retrieved the file without hurry, confirmed the pages were still in order, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the command post without another word. That silence, measured, deliberate, containing exactly nothing that wasn't meant to be there, was the first indication that Staff Sergeant Ingram had made a miscalculation he wouldn't fully understand until it was too late to matter. Before we go further, if stories like this stay with you, if you believe that quiet discipline and hard work deserve to be told, subscribe to Ranger Stories and follow this one all the way through. Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to know how far this reaches. The forward operating base outside Sinjar sat on a plateau above the Nineveh Plains, a scrape of concrete barriers, sandbags, and prefabricated shelters pressed up against a rocky escarpment that blocked the wind from the northeast and did nothing at all about anything else. It was October. The air carried the dry, flat quality of a region that had been hot and was now cooling towards something harsher, and the dust on the vehicle track leading in from the highway had the particular reddish-tan color of ground that hadn't seen rain in 4 months. Rains had arrived on a resupply convoy from Erbil after 6 hours in the back of a truck next to pallets of bottled water. She'd used the time to review terrain maps of the Sinjar corridor and the ridgeline approaches to the northwest. She had a habit of reviewing terrain. She had a habit of reviewing most things. She was 29 years old, 7 years in the Army, 4 of those as a combat marksman attached to Ranger support units, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. She had a record that, if you looked at it with any care, and she was aware that most people in this unit had not, showed an uncommon precision in a field that rewarded precision above nearly every other quality. She noticed, in the first 60 seconds after stepping off the convoy, 5 things about Bravo Troops FOB. The wear pattern on the motor pool pad told her which vehicles went out regularly and which didn't. The positioning of the guard posts showed 2 blind angles on the eastern perimeter. The distribution of personnel on a Thursday afternoon suggested morale was average or below. The amount of unattended equipment suggested the senior NCOs were either complacent or overextended. And the group of men watching her arrival from the vehicle bay, watching with the focused, preformed attention of people who had already talked about her before she arrived, told her everything she needed to know about what the next several weeks were going to require. She noted the man at the center of the group. Staff Sergeant Ingram was 41, broad through the shoulders, and carried himself with the settled authority of someone who had been the senior person in most rooms he'd occupied for the past decade and had long stopped questioning why. 4 combat deployments. He wore that fact less like a credential than like a right, the right to assess, dismiss, or acknowledge whoever appeared before him, according to a standard he'd set himself and never once been asked to justify. He walked toward her, not to assist. Anyone who watched Ingram for longer than 5 minutes understood the difference between when he moved towards something because he intended to help and when he moved towards something because he wanted an audience. He stopped. He read her name tape, Rains, as though the name itself were slightly off. That's right. Combat Marksman Specialist. He said it the way someone reads a job title that doesn't match the position listed. We put in for a JTAC. I know, you got me. He studied her, she studied him back. There was a particular kind of man she'd encountered across 7 years of service who mistook his own certainty for evidence. Ingram was that kind of man. He had decided something about her before she stepped off the truck, and now he was scanning for confirmation of a conclusion he had no intention of revising. Command post is at the far end, he said. Captain Sumner, you can find your own way. I can, she said, and walked. Behind her, over the ambient noise of the motor pool, she caught one phrase clearly, paper qualification, the laughter that followed it. She filed it without slowing down. Captain Sumner was 53, gray at the temples, with the economy of movement that develops in people who have held command in difficult environments long enough that everything unnecessary has been stripped away. He stood when she entered, automatic reflex, not ceremony, and shook her hand once. Rains, sit down. She sat. He turned to the map and briefed her in the language she'd grown up speaking, grid references, elevation profiles, approach routes, probable threat vectors, fields of observation. She listened and asked 4 questions. Each one produced a brief pause in which she could see him recalibrating, not surprised exactly, but adjusting for a level of precision he hadn't anticipated. When the briefing ended, he looked at her directly. Corporal Webb will show you the FOB layout. He's been here 11 months. I can manage. He'll show you, Sumner said, in the flat tone of something that had finished being a suggestion. Pay attention to what he tells you about the unit. Webb is 22 years old and has better situational awareness than half my senior NCOs. A pause. He knows things that don't appear in briefing documents. Corporal Webb was indeed 22, with the careful, slightly formal bearing of someone who had been told early in their career to compensate for youth with precision. He was waiting outside the command post. He fell in beside her, slightly behind and to her right, the protective positioning of someone who had done this often enough to do it without conscious direction. She noticed. He walked her through the FOB, latrine schedule, generator cycles, the gap in the northern berm where the drainage channel created a surveillance blind angle, the rotation patterns of the guard posts on the eastern perimeter, 2 angles she'd already identified and 2 she hadn't. Can I ask you something? He said after several minutes. You're going to regardless. He blinked. Then he almost smiled. Fair enough. Why here? Your record? Ingram looked it up before you arrived, but I don't think he read it carefully. I did. You could have been stateside. Training assignment. Why this FOB? She looked at him. He was watching the perimeter, not her. The deliberate focus of someone who was genuinely interested in the answer and was also genuinely interested in the wire. People who did both at once were worth paying attention to. You're walking on my right, she said. He blinked. What? Standard escort positioning is left, shields from the primary threat axis. You chose right, which means you've assessed the main threat as originating inside this base, not outside it. She held his gaze. That's not something most corporals work out after 11 months. Webb was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he exhaled, the slow, particular exhale of someone who has been trying to say an exact thing for a long time and has just been told they didn't need to. Since February, he said. I've been trying to figure out how to say that since February. What happened in February? He thought for a moment. Sergeant Falconer. He ran a reconnaissance through the Sinjar corridor. Came back and told Ingram the route felt wrong. No movement, no vehicles, no locals, no agriculture traffic, nothing. Like the valley had been cleared out in advance. And Ingram's response? Told him he was tired, said the intelligence was solid. Webb looked at the ground briefly, told him to write it up correctly or not write it up at all. A pause. Falconer wrote it up correctly. The report didn't make it into the intelligence summary. She filed this next to several things she'd been quietly accumulating since Bagram, since a classified brief she had read in a gray room 11 months ago, since the specific set of coordinates that had appeared in a patrol report with her brother's unit designation attached to it, a region where his unit had never been authorized to operate, 3 weeks before his convoy was hit on a route that should have been secure. She had not come to Bravo Troop by accident. She had come because 14 months of patient, careful, invisible work had led the thread here, to this FOB, this corridor, this specific intelligence channel that kept producing assessments that were too clean and too consistently wrong. Get some rest, she said. I need to review the terrain. She didn't sleep that first night. She worked. She pulled out the field notebook she'd carried through 3 deployments, its cover repaired twice with rigger's tape, its pages dense, with a handwriting that had become smaller and more compressed with each year, and wrote. Patrol routes she'd memorized from the operations logs, wind patterns she'd observed from the eastern berm at last light, personnel movement inside the wire, 3 probable positions on the northern ridgeline that didn't appear in any existing Overwatch employment records. At 130, Boots stopped outside her door. You're awake, Webb said through the door, not a question. Light was on. I know. Sergeant Falconer wants to talk to you. He's been trying to find the right moment since you arrived. She set down her pen. Send him. Falconer was 34, quiet in the way of someone who had said a true thing once and been dismissed for it, and had been living inside that silence ever since. He told her without preamble exactly what he'd seen in the corridor in February. The specific quality of stillness, no movement where there should have been movement, dust disturbed on the northern track, in patterns suggesting foot traffic coming down from the high ground rather than up from the road. What did the intelligence assessment say? She asked. Low to moderate risk, unlikely active presence. He looked at his hands. Same language it's used for every operation in 8 months. She thought about that. She thought about a picture she carried, not a photograph of her brother, but a satellite image she'd printed from a classified system in Bagram and folded into the inside pocket of her jacket. A road intersection northwest of Sinjar, the last place her brother's patrol had, reported a position before the transmission went silent. Thank you, she said. Don't tell Ingram you came here. He nodded once and left. She picked up her pen and wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote, I think this is it. The range demonstration happened the following afternoon. Sumner arranged it as standard procedure, practical calibration, a chance for the unit to assess the new asset. She understood what he was actually doing. He was giving her a stage. The range was set up below the eastern escarpment. Targets at 300 meters, 500, 700, and 850. Conditions were poor, a crosswind from the northwest, gusting and variable, the low October sun creating heat shimmer on the distant targets that didn't match the actual temperature. Most of the troop came out to watch. That alone was a data point. In her experience, soldiers didn't voluntarily gather for training demonstrations unless they expected something interesting. They expected her to fail. She could feel it in the way they positioned themselves, to the side, where they could watch her face when the shots went wrong. She set up without hurrying. She had a ritual and she kept it regardless of who was watching. Because the ritual wasn't performance. It was the ordered process of narrowing everything else down until only the shot remained. The 300-meter target registered a clean hit. Murmurs from the assembled soldiers, polite, neither surprised nor impressed. 300 meters was unremarkable. At 500, the crosswind pushed hard mid-flight. She had already accounted for it, center of mass. The murmurs changed. At 700 meters, the wind gusted at the exact moment of trigger break, a hard lateral push that should have pulled the round 18 inches off target. The target registered a clean hit. The watching soldiers went quiet in a way that was categorically different from the quiet before. She knew that quiet. She had produced it on other ranges in other countries. It was the quiet of an audience that had arrived expecting a particular outcome and was now confronting the fact that the outcome wasn't coming. At 850 meters, she took 70 seconds. Not for the shot itself. She needed them to read the wind along the full flight path, the way it behaved differently at 400 meters than at 200, the way it interacted with the escarpment and produced a correction sequence the surface wind didn't predict. She fired. The target went down. From somewhere in the back of the assembled group, someone began to clap. Slowly, then 2 more. Then the sound spread, reluctantly at first, then genuinely, the honest sound of people who had been wrong about something specific and were acknowledging it in the only direct way available to them. Ingram left before the last shot. She noticed his absence in the way she noticed most things, without comment, with precision, filed for later. She found Sumner in the vehicle bay the next morning. She told him what she had observed across her first 4 days. The specific wind patterns on the northern ridgeline approaches, the patrol route variants that kept 3 consecutive operations within a 100-meter corridor, the intelligence assessments that had not shifted in 8 months, despite changes in every surrounding variable. She did not mention Falconer. She kept that to herself, a source, not evidence. Sumner listened. When she finished, he was quiet longer than the information required. You're saying the route is compromised, he said. I'm saying the route shows characteristics consistent with pre-positioned surveillance, she said carefully. I can't confirm active threat from terrain observation alone. I can tell you that if I were establishing a cordon on this patrol route, I would position assets exactly where I'm describing. A pause. I've been looking at this since April, he said. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not confession, but the weight of someone who has been carrying information that belongs to more people than himself. I needed something that wouldn't disappear, something that couldn't be quietly redirected. She looked at him steadily. He's the source. Sumner didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. The way he redirected to the operational question told her everything the direct answer would have. There's a logistics patrol on Thursday. Medical supplies for the clinic in Canasser 3 vehicles. The route goes through the corridor. He met her eyes. I want you in Overwatch. She understood what he was not saying. Thursday was the mechanism. She was the variable Ingram hadn't planned for. I need to go up the ridgeline before the convoy enters the valley, she said. An hour minimum. Sumner looked at her for a long moment. Go. She was crossing the motor pool toward the equipment bay when she heard Ingram's voice behind her, not directed at her, directed at Tate, who was running a comms check near the vehicle line. The words were low. She caught fragments over the ambient noise. But she caught too clearly. Confirmed timing. She did not slow down. She walked to the equipment bay and dressed her kit. Rifle pack, cold weather layer. The secondary receiver she'd carried in her personal kit for 9 months. A piece of equipment that didn't appear on her authorized load list. Obtained through a contact at DIA who had known her brother and owed the memory of him something that could never be fully repaid. She thought about what she had heard. She thought about a document she had read in Bagram 14 months ago, cross-referencing patrol route disclosures to an intermediary network operating through this corridor, with an originating source identified by duty position and unit, a position that matched Ingram's exactly. She thought about her brother's convoy, on a route that should have been clean, in a valley that someone had made sure wasn't. She had not come here because the Army sent her here. She had come because 14 months of patient, invisible, methodical work had brought the thread to this base, this operation, this morning. She shouldered her pack and walked out into the pre-dawn dark. Webb was at the gate. I'm not asking you to stop, he said, falling in beside her. I'm telling you something. First, 40 minutes ago on the secondary net, channel 11, I picked up an encoded transmission, short. The frequency pattern matched a known insurgent relay signature from the northern corridor. He held her gaze. Origin was inside the wire. She stopped walking. Does Sumner know? Sumner's with Ingram. Pre-mission coordination. His jaw tightened. I couldn't say it in front of him. She stood in the dark and let the full picture settle into alignment, every piece falling into place with the specific, terrible clarity of something that had been true for a long time and was only now completely visible. The route disclosures. Falconer's report that disappeared. Her brother's patrol on a road someone had quietly sold. The 14 months between the document and this morning. Tell Sumner when Ingram isn't present, she said. Channel 11, encoded inside the wire. Exact words, no one else. She looked at the ridgeline. I'm going up. Rains. She looked at him. He had the expression of someone who had been paying close attention for 11 months and understood, with more precision than most people around her, exactly what she was carrying and exactly what she was about to walk into. You too, Webb, she said. She turned and walked toward the mountain. She had been climbing for 19 minutes when the first RPG detonated. The concussion reached her through the rock before the sound did, a deep physical pressure that moved up through her boot soles into her chest. Then the sound rolled up the escarpment, and in the radio on her vest, the controlled noise of men in contact replaced whatever had been there before. She didn't stop climbing. She needed 3 more minutes to reach the ledge she'd selected from the terrain map. A narrow shelf at 900 meters with a clean sight line down the full length of the valley floor. 3 minutes was 3 minutes. Stopping now helped no one. Reaching position would. She climbed faster. The ledge was exactly where the map said it would be. She pulled herself over the edge, went prone, deployed her rifle, and looked through the scope. The convoy was already compromised. The lead vehicle was burning. The second had been stopped by the initial blast and was taking fire from multiple elevated positions simultaneously. Not sporadic fire, not opportunistic shots, but coordinated, overlapping, professional fire from shooters who had been in position before the convoy entered the valley. The Marines were pinned. She keyed her radio. Overwatch not yet in position, 90 seconds. Sumner's voice, copy, move. She identified the first position in 4 seconds. Northern ridgeline, approximately 340 meters from her current position, in a rock formation she'd noted on the terrain map during her first night's reconnaissance as a probable placement. She breathed out. She fired. The muzzle signature disappeared. Overwatch to actual. North Ridge, position 1 cleared. Engaging. Sumner's voice immediate. Copy Overwatch. Good to hear you. The second position was on the south face, higher, placed to create crossfire that eliminated the vehicle column's natural cover. She found it from the impact pattern on the third vehicle and tracked the trajectory backward. She fired. 2 down. The third position was suppressing the dismounted soldiers trying to reach the wounded near the burning vehicle. Not random fire, deliberate targeting of men attempting to move. She identified it from the selection pattern of the rounds and put 2 shots into it in rapid succession. The fire stopped. 3 down. The fourth position took longer. She found it by stepping back from the individual details and looking at the whole picture. The distribution of impact strikes told her the angle, and the angle gave her the position. She fired once. 4 down. Then something changed in what remained. The coordinated professional quality of the ambush began to fray at the edges, the way a structure fails when you remove its supports in sequence rather than all at once. The remaining fire was more cautious, less confident. Something had broken in the architecture. She swept the ridge lines. She found nothing. She swept again. Still nothing. And then she understood that she had been wrong about the number of positions. She'd found 4. There was a 5th, and the 5th was not on a ridge line. She looked at the valley floor. She looked at the pattern of fire that had continued after the 4 positions were cleared. The precision of it, the specific selection of targets, minimum rounds for maximum restraint of movement. That was not a fighter. That was trained. That was someone who had learned the same doctrine she had in the same language. She found him at 960 meters, tucked into a dead ground fold at the valley floor's northern edge, invisible from any ridgeline, directly observable from her current angle. She read the wind for 40 seconds, not the wind on the ledge. The wind along the full flight path, the way it shifted around the terrain, features at 400 meters, and did something complicated near the target that she could only read from the dust movement at that distance. She thought about her brother. Not with grief, she had put grief in a specific place years ago, not to suppress it, but to make it available when she could afford it. She thought about him technically. She thought about something he had told her when they were both still in training, sitting outside the barracks in Georgia on a warm October night. The shot isn't a moment. It's the end of a sentence you started writing when you first looked at the terrain. Get the sentence right and the shot just happens. He had been 24 when he said that. He had been 26 when he died. She exhaled. She waited for the wind pattern to reach its on-axis peak, a 2-second window visible in the behavior of the dust at the base of the target's position. She confirmed it across 2 full cycles. Third cycle. She fired. The valley went quiet. Not the quiet of resolution, the quiet of exhaustion, the sound of a thing that has spent everything it had. Then slowly, the voices of the soldiers below began to reorganize, calling positions, calling medical, the specific vocabulary of men who have been in a fight and are now determining what the fight cost them. She lay still for 30 seconds, then she keyed her radio. Overwatch to actual. 5 positions cleared. Valley is clean. You can move. A pause. Then Sumner's voice, and beneath the professional acknowledgement was something that belonged to a different register than operational language entirely. Copy Overwatch. Well done. She began breaking down her position. She was halfway down the mountain when her secondary receiver activated. 12 seconds, encoded. The same frequency pattern Webb had flagged from inside the wire. A status report, confirmation of failed operation, request for further instruction originating from the valley floor, not the ridgeline. She increased her descent. She found Sumner near the second vehicle, directing the consolidation of wounded, blood on his sleeve from somewhere, moving with the careful precision of a man who had decided that acknowledgement could come later. "Where's Ingram?" she said. He looked at her face. He pointed north. She moved north. She had the receiver in her pack, its display showing transmission origin coordinates she recognized from a map reference she had memorized 14 months ago, a compound northeast of Sinjar, connected to a network that had been using this corridor for 3 years. The name at the top of the network was the name that appeared at the edge of her brother's mission file, attached to the route disclosure that had killed him. She had the piece, she needed Ingram intact to connect it. She found him in a rocky drainage channel at the northern end of the valley, moving at the pace of a man who understood his window had closed and was running, because running was the only calculation left. She came up on a shelf above the channel. She looked through her scope. She had a clean shot at 38 meters. She did not take it. A dead Ingram was a closed door. A living Ingram, in custody, with the receiver data and the channel, 11 logs and 8 months of Sumner's quiet documentation, was a door that opened onto every room this network had been using. Her brother deserved a door. Ingram, she said. He froze. She watched him work through it. The direction of her voice, the elevation, the fact that she had found him here, in this specific place. She watched him understand that she had not spent the morning fighting an ambush. She had been running a parallel operation. Put the radio down, she said, and the sidearm. A long pause. She watched his shoulders. She had seen this particular stillness before. The stillness before a decision that has no good remaining options. It's finished, she said. Webb has the channel 11 logs. Sumner has 8 months of documentation. I have transmission coordinates from northeast of Sinjar that match a facility your network has been using for 3 years. She kept the shot picture steady. And I have a classified document connecting that facility to a patrol route disclosure that killed 4 Rangers 26 months ago. A pause. One of them was my brother. The silence lasted longer than tactical silences usually did. Then Ingram's hand opened. The radio hit the floor of the drainage channel. The sidearm followed. He stood up slowly, hands away from his body, and turned toward the direction of her voice. Instinctive, the reflex of a man who needed to face what was facing him, even though he couldn't see it. Who are you? He said, not a threat, not quite a question. My name is Rains, she said. My brother's name was Corporal Daniel Rains, 75th Ranger Regiment. He was killed on a route someone sold. You know who sold it. And in about 40 minutes, you're going to start explaining everything you know about the people above you. A pause. Because they don't know this operation failed yet. And you're the only person who can help close that window before it closes on its own. Ingram stood in the drainage channel with his hands up and said nothing, but something moved behind his eyes. Not contrition, not quite. The specific, reluctant reckoning of a man who has just run out of alternative calculations. Webb arrived 2 minutes later from the southern end of the channel, breathing hard, and made the arrest he would later describe in his official statement as the moment 11 months of paying close attention to things that other people weren't looking at revealed why it had been worth it. He put restraints on Ingram with hands that were steady and eyes that weren't. The expression of a young man who had just learned something definitive about patience and what it produces. Sumner arrived 90 seconds after that. He looked at Ingram in restraints. He looked at Rains on the rock shelf above the channel, rifle still in hand, completely still. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, did you get the trace? She held up the secondary receiver. Sumner closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, he had the expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just, for the first time, been able to put it down. Good, he said. Just that. 3 weeks later, the compound northeast of Sinjar was dismantled through a joint operation involving 2 intelligence agencies and a diplomatic coordination process that took longer than the operational component and mattered more. 11 individuals were indicted across 4 countries. A network that had operated through the northern Iraq corridor for 3 years was taken, apart with sufficient evidence that the cases held completely. Ingram pleaded guilty to 6 charges. He never went to trial. There was nothing left to argue. Her brother's unit and the units of 3 other soldiers killed in compromised operations through the same corridor had their mission records formally reviewed and reclassified. The language changed in each file, not combat loss. Operational compromise resulting from deliberate intelligence disclosure. The distinction, to the families who had been living with the wrong words for years, was not a small one. Rains received a formal reprimand for the unauthorized receiver equipment. She also received a commendation. The board that issued both had read Sumner's statement and possessed the institutional intelligence to understand that the two were not in contradiction. She requested a transfer to a training assignment. She was given it. In her first class, she had 14 Rangers, 10 men, 4 women, learning the particular discipline of reading terrain before asking anything of it, of understanding the conversation the environment was offering before making any demands of your own. She taught them what her brother had told her on a warm October night in Georgia, before either of them understood what the years ahead were going to require. She told them that preparation was not something that happened on the day. It was the accumulation of every quiet morning, every cold training session, every moment when discipline was the harder choice, and you made it anyway, when no one was watching and there was no one to credit you for it. She told them the battlefield didn't care about their rank, their reputation, or what the person standing next to them had decided to believe about them before they'd seen them work. It only cared whether, when the moment arrived, they had done the work to be ready. And then she told them to pick up their rifles. The mountains were waiting.